Welcome everybody. My name is Avril Keating and I am the Director of the UCL Centre for Global Youth. We want to welcome you to the fifth and final webinar in our Youth Mobility series. Sadly, all good things must come to an end. As this is the last seminar, I want to take the opportunity to thank my collaborators, Dr. Sazana Jayadeva and soon to be Dr. I'm sure, Rachel Benchikroon. Rachel is due to submit her thesis this summer. What we wanted to do with this series was to bring together sort of different experiences of youth mobilities in very different contexts and to see what the similarities and differences were. And so we've done that through this series by looking at China, we've looked at India, we've looked at East Asian mobility to Australia, and we've also looked at the UK. Now, if you are new to this series and you haven't joined us before, you can find out more about the programme on the UCL Global Youth blog, or you can catch up on previous seminars on our YouTube channel. But to close the series, we're going to look at the experiences of a quite distinct group, namely young unaccompanied asylum seekers, who face quite different challenges. And so we're going to look at the challenges that they face after they arrive in the UK. So quite different to what we've looked at before, because we've looked at young people so far in previous seminars who have young people with far more freedom of movement. So to explore the distinct challenges of young people who are unaccompanied asylum seekers, we're going to have two presentations today. The first from Dr. Elaine Chase, who will be talking about her findings from the findings coming out of a project called Lives on Hold, Our Stories Told. And she will be joined by one of the young researchers on her project, Joanna. We'll also, then the second presentation will feature Dr. Rachel Rosen, who is also our colleague at UCL, and she'll be presenting findings from her Children Caring on the Move project. Now, the format of this presentation is the same we've had for the other seminars. Each speaker has, each presentation will be about 15 minutes long. And then after that, we'll leave plenty of time for questions and answers for Q&A period. Once again, if you have a question that comes up along the way, please put this into the chat and then we'll ask it to present it to the speakers at the end of the session. Okay? So thanks very much. I'm now going to pass over to you, Elaine, if you're ready to start us off.
Thanks so much, Avril. And thanks for the opportunity for sharing some emerging findings from this project. I've attended a number of the seminars and I've really enjoyed them. It's been a great sort of space for conversation and looking at similarities and differences across contexts. I'm joined together by Joanna, one of our peer researchers from Spressa. So we're going to share the presentation. So Lives on Hold, Our Stories Told is led by Professor Helen Stolford, Professor in Law at Liverpool University. We have colleagues from the departments of Developmental Psychology and Politics, so Jana Krepner and Ingi Eisman from University of Southampton. I'm based at UCL Institute of Education, and we also have a fantastic new postdoc who's recently joined us, William Shankly, who's also based at Liverpool. We're working in very close collaboration with a wonderful Albanian community organisation called Spressa. So Lives on Hold, Our Stories Told is a title that the young researchers gave to the project. It's essentially looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the experiences of unaccompanied migrant young people and their access to legal and social care services in the UK. So in terms of an overview, I'm going to talk very briefly about some previous work that ran sort of into this project. Then we're going to briefly introduce the LOHST Project. I'm going to hand over to Joanna, who will talk about the methodology focusing on peer research and some ethical reflections that we're grappling with and working with as a team as we work. Then we're going to touch on some emerging findings, including the perspectives from young people. We'll share that part of the presentation, and then just a few concluding thoughts. Okay, so the end of last year, beginning of this year, we produced the book. The book came out, Youth Migration and the Politics of Wellbeing, written by myself and Jennifer Alstott, but based very much on team effort and a collaborative effort with young people who've written various things in various other guises from the project. It very much sort of wanted to understand well-being from the perspectives of unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people, particularly as they make the transition to 18. Well-being is very closely associated with a sense of security and being able to pursue a viable future. So it's linked to ideas of that sense of, a core sense of what we might call ontological security, a sense of where you are in the world, where it's going, where you're going in the world, and what the kind of future holds. There's a sense of coherence to it. Obviously, most of us have lost that completely in the context of the pandemic, but others have lost it more than some. What we noted in the book, if anyone's interested, is that poor well-being outcomes don't just happen, they're politically induced by systems and structures that make life very difficult for young people. That young people, particularly as they make the transition to 18, are ignored in current policy frameworks. That there's a clear disconnect between the kinds of futures that young people aspire to and what they will work towards, and the policy framework that basically prevents them from doing that. So they're very different notions of what durable solutions are in this space. We know that with adequate care and support, young people post-18 can have very highly successful transitions, but very frequently they face homelessness, destitution, poor physical and mental health, times of detention and forced removal, or years and decades of just waiting in a system while it decides what they can and cannot do. And so having their lives on hold is very common. At the point of approaching 18, many young people disengage from statutory services, and where they are removed forcibly, they often re-migrate. So these are the sorts of general outcomes we know for unaccompanied young people transitioning to adulthood. So what happens then when enter COVID-19? And this is what the current project is looking at. It's an 18-month rapid response project funded by the ESRC. Its objectives are to give voice to young people facing the sorts of delays and problems and the impact on their lives and well-being. Looking at what the concrete delays are in the asylum process due to COVID-19, everything from initial and substantive interviews that young people have to go through to decision-making by the Home Office and issues of age assessments and the format that they're currently taking. We want to better understand the strategies adopted by legal and welfare practitioners as they try and navigate the space and the challenges of COVID-19. And we want to inform policy recommendations so that they're more aligned to the interests, rights, and needs of young people seeking asylum. We're working specifically with Spresa, an Albanian community organization who supports hundreds of unaccompanied young people from Albania, and really engages with the very specific issues that young people from Albania face in the asylum process. So specific forms of persecution, which are very different, very often not recognized in legal systems and processes, such as family and interfamily blood feuds and different forms of trafficking. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Joanna now, who'll talk a little bit about the methodology and some of the reflections from a kind of peer researcher perspective.
Thank you, Elaine. Hi, everybody. Lovely to have you all here. Basically, the methodology of the peer research of the Lives on Hold, Our Story Told is interviews with young people, range from 16 to 25 years old. Peer research methods could be 10 peer researchers while interviewing other young people. We're trained in qualitative interviewing with Elaine and the others. Co-design the research tools and project informations, consent forms, information sheets, animation, interview guides, involved in all aspects of research from data collection to analysis and writing. So the ethical reflections, challenges in the research fields. It could be a possibility that the questions that are being you are interviewing the young people could feel a little bit intimidating. It could be triggered bad memories or flashbacks from the things that they went through, importance of gaining trust and building a connection. That could be a challenge. Young people feeling judged in a way for whatever they went through. What peer researchers bring to the project, to the team, set of skills, training and experience, specific knowledge, like immigration. We've been trained, most of them are trained as immigration champions. We've been through and know how the process is and how it feels and how it is to be on their shoes. Sensitive to not asking direct questions or to go straight to the point, but we could ask in a more gentle way. Can recognize and have instincts of how when the young people could feel feeling is uncomfortable. We could tell in a way. Ethical reflections. The challenges for peer researchers for us is it's feeling a bit anxious or nervous about asking questions in the right way, or it feels if it is in the right way or friendly. Concerns about getting things wrong, upsetting them, how to make sure that participants really fully understand the research and are consenting to. Having to translate between languages, that could be quite tricky or you could get kind of messed up in a way. What we gain from being peer researchers: experience, knowledge about the research and interviewing, working in a group where you learn from other skills, many other skills, a chance to shape the messages from the research. I'll hand over to Elaine.
Thanks, Joanna. So just in terms of a few emerging findings, we're very early on in the project as we stand, but I wanted to say, first of all, a little bit about the context. As well as the pandemic, there's a whole raft of other things going on in the kind of landscape of immigration and asylum and the asylum system. So we've had Brexit, which limits access to EU protections and support for young people. We've seen the end of the Dublin III regulation, which means that there's no longer the possibility of being able to move through the Dublin III to be reunited with family in the UK. We've seen the end of the DUBS transfer scheme, which was able to bring young people, unaccompanied young people, particularly from Calais and other places, to rejoin family members in the UK. And we have an increasingly hostile environment typified by the proposed new immigration plan, which has been recently out for consultation, which talks about a tough love approach to immigration decision-making, talks about fairness and so-called efficiency, and efficiency being absolutely paramount. It centers around the notion of deservingness for being able to remain in the UK based on whether or not you enter the country legally or illegally. So it fundamentally, in essence, criminalizes the search for protection. So this is a sort of environment that's going on in the backdrop as well as COVID-19, and it's important to kind of reflect on that. What seems to be emerging, and as I've said, it's very early on, is that COVID-19 has increased delays to the asylum process. Currently, there's a backlog of about 56,000 asylum claims. And that impacts on the initial screening interview, the substantive interview, the appeals process, and on the decision-making process. It impacts on access to legal advice and support. And there's been an introduction to a new form of age assessment, which is a short form, which is open to all sorts of difficulties and problems and means that due process may not be being always followed. The impacts on young people are huge. The sense of isolation has been exacerbated by COVID-19. One young person said to us recently, there's one room and one window, and that's it. They have had limited access or no access to education, depending on their status. They're unable to work. The challenges in accessing health and related services, including mental health services, have been really difficult. And there have been severe impacts on their mental health and well-being. We've seen regional variation that appears to be emerging in terms of the level of support young people receive, and we'll be exploring that further. But overall, it's difficult to separate out the impact of COVID-19 from the wider impacts of the increasingly hostile immigration system. And COVID-19 has become, as some young people would say, an excuse for that. We organised a blog led by Helen to write about some of the experiences or responses to the COVID-19, to the new immigration plan, and also to the consultation on the new immigration plan. And the voices that, the kind of comments and voices that young people had on that were very, very striking. And Joanna's just going to give us a few examples of those thoughts now.
So I'll just read some of the people's thoughts. Do you know how we're feeling? Frightened, having nightmares. Everyone, though, that this period of pandemic had made people reflect and made people feel and see what it is to be like to be locked, scared, and hopeless. But I guess we were wrong. All our dreams and hopes have been destroyed. Right here, today, I am more scared than ever. Asylum seekers fleeing persecution of life-threatening reasons cannot always find a legal way of traveling. Does this really make claim not genuine? We often wait years for the claim to be heard. Housed in a substandard accommodation, many of us clinically depressed, desperately worried about our future and banned for working or studying. Now the Home Secretary has decided that our lives are not miserable enough and must be made more. So by the knowledge that the leave to remain could be revoked at any time. If this isn't entirely unreasonable and inhuman, I don't know what is anymore. My dad sent me away at the age of 17 in the hope of a safer life. As far from the horrifying life I was living, I was constantly thinking that the air I was breathing would be my last. I was sent away because of a blood feud. I was banned from my friends and family for something I hadn't even done. Life has never been easier for me. From a blood feud to a runaway immigrant, to a slave trying to survive, to a teenage boy living in a car wash. Priti Patel's new immigration rules are making this hostile environment that has been created way more hostile, and there is a complete lack of empathy. We are people that have been through a lot, and we have not chosen to come in the UK in a certain way. Life has made us. A lot of people die while trying to cross the border, and I fail to see how she can make us have less entitlements because of something that wasn't in our hands. The fear of being returned back home at any time is completely unhuman and is something that will not be at the back of our minds and will not allow us to build a safe future of ourselves. I'll hand back to Elaine. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joanna. So just some concluding thoughts. COVID-19 appears to exacerbate the effects of an already struggling, or we might say broken, asylum system. It's difficult to isolate the specific effects of the pandemic, which is the focus of our study. But has it become an excuse for delays in processing? Is it being used strategically by the Home Office to limit access to asylum, e.g. through aging out processes? So young people are waiting so long when they arrive as children that by the time their case actually gets heard, they already have made the transition to institutional adulthood at 18. There are questions about due process in terms of access to legal advice, short-term age assessments, etc., which we'll continue to gather data on and make sense of over the next year or so. What's going to happen with the new immigration plan is we're waiting. The consultation has just ended. If it emerges in its current iteration, it's going to be hugely detrimental to the lives of young people and anybody else seeking asylum in the UK. The LOHST Project runs until July next year. If you want to learn more, we have a great website which has been designed by the peer researchers, and there's a link there to the blog. And just to finish, I put a few references to peer research and some of the reflections that have emerged from young people working as peer researchers from the Becoming Adult project And we'll continue to have these discussions amongst the team in the LOHST project. The most recent one has just been published in Peer Research in Health and Social Development, a chapter led by members of our team from the Becoming Adult project, and is available now. So thanks for listening, and we look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Elaine and Joanna. I'm now going to pass over to Rachel Rosen, who will be talking about children caring on the move.
Hi, everyone. Let me just get my slides ready here. Sorry. Oh, no, you'll see my slides as well. That's the best I can do here. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak here. It's really great. And I think, or I hope anyway, this talk follows on really nicely from Johanna and Elaine's talk. I'm picking up on some very similar themes here. So some of the things that we heard Johanna and Elaine talk about are about waithood, being stuck in time, about limbo, forever temporary, lost or uncertain futures. Metaphors like this are commonplace in discussions of migration and asylum, including for separated child migrants, in reference to the time of waiting for applications to be considered and status to be granted. Conceptualizations of the temporalities of migration have aptly demonstrated the violence of time when it's used as a border technology. And we heard already some of this from Johanna and Elaine. So what I want to talk about today, I don't want to dispute the ferocious effects of restrictive migration regimes and time as a border technology. But in thinking with research data from the Children Caring on the Move project, I seek to complicate such understandings. What I'll do is I'll tend to young migrants' care for and about others while they wait. In doing so, I will argue, provides insights not only into waithood and its afterlife, but it will help to reorient conceptualizations of young people's futures to the uneven possibilities and practices for imagining and constructing not just a future, but alternative futures. So, sorry, the joys of working between two screens, helpful, but not always the smoothest transitions. There we go. So I'm going to be drawing today on research from the Children Caring on the Move project, which I co-lead with Sarah Crafter at basically Open University, and Elaine is also involved in the project. The project is an ESRC funded project investigating separated child migrants' experiences of care and caring for others as they navigate the complexities of the immigration welfare nexus in England. Just as a sort of side note, I'd like to say I'm using the term separated child migrants or unaccompanied young people very loosely today in reference to those young people who have come to the UK without parents or carers, recognizing that they may have been together at some point on their journeys. They may have come with other adults or children. So that this can be kind of a varying relationships on migration journeys. And while legally 18 years old is the cutoff of childhood in the UK, and so age does have significant consequences in terms of access to support and services, for example. We really, in the project, take on board that childhood and youth is socially constructed, although age has become a legal fetishism in the capitalist North. And so we are meeting young people who might arrive in England when they're 18 and a half, but after they've been on the move alone for years, some since they were 11 or 12 years old, who might not fall into the sort of more legally based category of separated child migrants. For many young people who we work with who are under 18, the category of childhood simply doesn't seem applicable to them, not least because for some migration is a rite of passage to social adulthood. So that all this to say, I'm using separated child migrant in a very loose sort of way here. The Children Caring on the Move project, we conduct interviews with adult stakeholders in combination with an analysis of the cultural political economy of separated children's care. But at the project's core, and the data that I'll be drawing on today, is a participatory model of research, design, and practice, working with two teams of young researchers in the West Midlands and Greater London, So really a kind of parallel process to what you heard about from the LOHST Project. These two teams of young researchers have worked with us to define our research questions, to trial, practice, design, and ultimately use different methods. And so we're in the process right now of generating data with young people who've arrived to the UK as separated child migrants. The young people we've been speaking with as part of the research have come to the UK through state-sanctioned means. So Elaine spoke about Dublin 3 or DUB, so some have come through those sorts of routes, but also through a variety of self-propelled routes, whether on boats or lorries via Calais in France, sometimes with smugglers, combinations of these various forms. Many of the young people involved in the research are in the process of seeking asylum as unaccompanied asylum seeking children, although participants also include those who are unregular or undocumented, or become so if their claim is rejected. In this process of claiming asylum, young people experience periods of prolonged waiting for their Home Office interviews to take place, for their asylum claims to be reviewed, for appeals to be processed, and for the results of age contestations. They experience waiting for slightly more permanent support and accommodation as they are moved across the country through the National Transfer Scheme or between accommodation as care leavers. They wait for the results of family tracing programs or to make contacts with friends and families through more informal means. So waiting is ubiquitous in their experiences. In much of the literature on migration, such periods of waithood are theorized as creating very particular relations to the future, one in which the future is held hostage, wasted time or stolen time, which leads migrants towards a sense of an inability to project into the future. Or as Elaine in her own work has talked about, conditions of ontological uncertainty which make the future unimaginable. Sort of an enforced presentism with obscured or unrealizable futures. Such ideas about the future take on particular salience in discussion of child migrants, where dominant popular and academic understandings treat children as the quintessential figure representing the yet to come, representing the future. The familiar refrain, children are our future, as well as teleological ideas about child development and commitments to children as human capital for future prosperity, are grounded in the idea that children's value, their contributions lie in their future contributions as adults, and that the most must be made now of their malleability. In this formulation, child migrants are in a particularly fragile position in terms of this idea of waithood. Time lost in childhood is not simply viewed as wasted time, but it threatens the existential waste of a potential future member of society. Needless to say, these formulations highlight the extended and extreme consequences of waithood. Anticipatory orientations to childhood effectively position children outside of human societies until they reach adulthood. It empties children of political and other forms of agency in the here and now, and minimizes their social participation and meaning making. So I'm not holding to these ideas about children are our future or waste, but to articulate the ways in which these discourses are extremely present in thinking about separated child migrants and waithood. So what I'm interested in doing here is asking what sorts of theoretical, conceptual, methodological insights about waithood and futures might we generate if we take on board the ways in which young migrants imagine and orient their present practices towards possible futures. So in our research, certainly theorizations of hostage or unimaginable futures caused by waithood in migration regimes resonates with the ways that many of the participants in comms and young researchers speak about their own experiences. Some convey a sense of the stickiness of waithood, that it seeps and spreads into all aspects of their lives. So being stuck in a legal limbo over immigration status extends into education, into health, into accommodation, into any sorts of plans for the future. Some of the young people describe waithood as a time of boredom, a time of emptiness where disturbing memories can surface. There's too much thinking, too much boring everything in these times of waithood, one of the participants told us. And many have spoken, we've been doing many of our interviews on Zoom over the time of the pandemic, and many have spoken about the ways in which COVID has exacerbated, or the quarantines have exacerbated these feelings of being alone and isolated and bored, where disturbing, upsetting memories can surface. Many young people speak about waithood as a time where future hopes are given and then taken away, because as they reach legal adulthood, in their encounters with the Home Office. One young person said, they say to you, you are safe. They give you the support, but when you turn 18, they say, you don't get a say. If you get refused, you have to go out, you have to go homeless, or they kick you out of college, the GP in-house anyway. I asked them, well, when I come here and you said to me, you are safe, you're everything, why you say that to me? Why you say that when I come to this country? So there's a sense in which waithood becomes more extreme, more intense, more unforgiving in these moments, in that transition to adulthood, social adulthood. These vernacular understandings and articulations are important, and they highlight, as with the theoretical literature, what I think is really a violence of waithood, or a slow violence of waithood, and how it takes hostage of the future. But it's also important that we don't collapse migrants into the temporality of waithood, as though this is the only thing, the only temporality in which they're living, effectively reproducing the coloniality of power, as Khosravi warns, where we have futures or live in temporalities animated by possible futures, while they, migrants, do not. Similarly, theoretical understandings of waithood cannot rest on depictions of young people as simply the victims of time as a border technology. And I think Elaine, along with Jenny Chase, has really vividly shown the way young people use time tactically as a way of securing status and sustaining themselves while they wait for status, so that they're not existentially determined by the time of border regimes. These are really important insights that I want to build on, while remaining wary that an exclusive focus on immigration status and the time of waithood of securing a stable immigration status entails. So while this is important, it can inadvertently limit discussion of the future to questions of what Jacob and Carlson term reassertion into the national order and a supposedly normal social life. Instead, what I want to do is to say, to keep hold of those, the violence of waithood, and also keep open the questions of which futures are desirable and how those can be produced. So rather than the future as an insertion into the national order, what futures are desirable, how are they being produced? And so asking what alternative futures, if any, are imagined and practiced and produced in the space of waithood. And so here I suggest that in the small spaces of hope and connection forged between young people on the move, we get glimpses of the ways in which geopolitical boundaries are exposed for their fabrication. And we catch flickers of alternative futures. These alternative futures are not just imaginable or made imaginable in this position on the margins, this enforced precarity and position on the margins, but they're made possible through young people's everyday practices. So our research training session was coming to an end one day, and one of the young researchers took the bus pass I was giving out and passed it quietly to another young researcher. Seeing me watch this interchange, the young researcher explained to me, they don't get a bus pass from college. I nod and notice the others in the group listening intently. At the next session, two young researchers quietly slide their bus passes over. 6 months into our training, this had become somewhat of a ritual. I hand out the bus passes to each individual, and they immediately share the bus pass with the team member who had no other support for travel. When I raised this months later with the young researchers, one comments that she would have liked to keep the bus pass for herself, because in summer when I'm not in college, the bus is so expensive, isn't it? But then you have to do things that aren't just for you. Sometimes it's important for other people. These generous acts between people who barely knew each other from 1 year before, I think, are really powerful. They suggest a sense of relationality motivated by concern for collective, not just individual well-being, for sociality and the other. These young people's practices challenge the injustices of the present and nurture effective, embodied, and material ways of being otherwise, alternative futures in action. For months now, one of the young researchers has been insisting that other young people do not understand their situation. They have mentioned feeling always on the outskirts of the group, sometimes feeling too old, sometimes frustrated with the lack of understanding of their journey through the UK's hostile asylum system, always feeling different. Recently, another member of the young researchers team turned to them and said, "It's really hard for you. There isn't anyone here for your country or who speaks your language." Another young researcher quickly piped up, "We are your country now." Everyone nods. These are fleeting examples, to be sure. But ones that refuse the nationalism and nativist exclusions of the UK's hostile environment. They refuse paternalistic ideas about childhood and children as simply recipients of care, and about criminalization discourses of young people who are deemed risky to the UK state. Like the sharing of bus passes to counter age boundaries, this moment of being of the same country now is not one seeking broader social transformation, but I think it hints at the possibilities of collective understanding and action against bordering, and the knowledge that if not nations and borders are constructed, they can indeed be unmade or made differently. I think here we can also see quite radical acts of care over and against what might be viewed as the carelessness that pervades a retrenched welfare regime and the uncaring of the UK's hostile environment, which discards those young people who do not fit a categorical age-based construction for the need of care in the name of this technological jargon Elaine talked about, of fairness and efficiency. So when unaccompanied young people tell us about delivering food to elderly people or others afraid to go out during the pandemic, when they state about our COM research, quote, "We are not just doing this research for ourselves, but for others too. We do it because we care for them and we want them to know they are not alone." We catch a glimpse here of respect, of supporting others, and of conviviality. For me, these radical acts of care, sociability, and solidarity are small moments of re-enchantment, as Siva Mohan Balavan put it recently, where intimate and political efforts to build common cause towards alternative and more just futures are nurtured. To be sure, I'm certainly not suggesting that enforced waithood is a positive thing. It produces precarious and insecure futures for separated child migrants, as it does for adults on the move. But we should not miss the alternatives being nurtured in its shadows. These fleeting moments can join up, become stronger if they are given attention, learned from, and amplified, a task worthy of efforts against the violence of enforced waithood in the UK's hostile migration regime. Thank you very much. And I will stop sharing if I can figure out my computers. There we go.
Thank you so much, Rachel, Elaine, and Joanna. It was simultaneously depressing and heartening to hear your presentations. Depressing because of the increasingly hostile environment and the failure to provide basic human services or human dignity to young people and people who are applying for asylum. But also within that, just hope, looking at hearing the stories of young people who are engaging in research, who are engaging in caring and doing their best with a horrible situation that they're in and being put in by the Home Office. So thank you to both. I won't abuse my position as a chair right now. I'll save that for another time because there's already some questions in the chat. I will say, Elaine, I was looking for the links to your blog and to your website, and I can't find them on the internet. So if you want to send them to me now or later, I'll post them on Twitter for people. Okay, and I have some questions for you. Let me see, from Lucy H. Brilliant presentations. I have a question on peer research. Do either of you find the young researchers who wanted to participate tell their own stories as well? They want to be contributors as well as researchers. If so, how did you address this? Elaine, you're unmuted. Do you want to take that one first then?
Yeah, I can see Rachel's nodding and Joanna's nodding. Yes, absolutely. So that's was part of our design, and I think similarly for the other project as well. So young people very much have the opportunity to tell their stories as part of the project. There were some ethical issues that arose out of that. So even though young people were working very closely as a team, they wanted the privacy to not share the details and more kind of detailed insights of their own experiences with each other. And so we organized for those interviews to be done by one of the, I suppose, senior or older, more experienced members of the research team, and not with a peer researcher present. And that was very much their choice. But Joanna, I don't know if you want to reflect on that, this idea of being part of the peer research team who's helping with interviews, but also being, I suppose, a research participant.
No, I mean, I did, I think all of that we contributed and volunteered to do this peer research. We wanted to contribute, and probably we wanted to be, in a way, probably a helping hand while interviewing and being part of this project for those young people, so they don't get to experience whatever they experienced before while being interviewed. So we like step up and saying we're going to interview, but as well you and Helen and Inji and Yana as being there with us, but at the same time kind of helping or being there just to contribute and sharing, and as we know might be a little bit more experienced. So yeah, I think it's been amazing so far.
Thanks, Joanna.
Just to add in terms of the COM project, yes, I mean, I think as Elaine and Joanna have said, the sharing, young researchers sharing their own experiences has been a part of the model. So as we were doing training, we piloted a lot of the different methods we could potentially use, and these were opportunities for young researchers to share their own experiences as they wanted to. But I think for me, being part of the research encounter, so this is usually a young researcher, a participant, and one of our university-based researchers. We have a three-way interview. One of the things I've been most impressed and inspired by are the ways in which the young researchers share their experiences as a form of support and solidarity and encouragement within the interviews themselves. So these interviews do not have a kind of neutral ivory tower approach to them at all, but they include these kinds of the research interviews themselves. I think we could think about as an act of care and an act of solidarity and advocacy. And so stories come in that way. Just to say one other point with both young researchers and participants, one of the discussions we had early on is that our encounters should never, ever feel like a home office interview. And so when we're inviting young people to take part, that's usually the first thing that somebody in our group will say, this is not a home office interview. And what they're getting at there is that it should be up to the young person, up to the participants, what they want to share, when they want to share it, and how they want to share it. And so that goes kind of across the board, that sort of approach. And finally, that as researchers, as university-based researchers, that we should also be making ourselves open and available and part of the conversations, that we are not sort of outside of them, although our experiences are very different, that people know that they can ask us questions too. I think that's a way of kind of trying to address some of the power imbalances that can happen.
Rachel, I found that very interesting. I'm wondering there, when you're saying about the Home Office, this is not a Home Office interview and that young people should feel comfortable. I wonder how much that in essence that's practicable in, I remember reading about young people who are homeless and how they feel they have to perform by telling their story. So ultimately there's always going to be that part of it where they feel like, well, you're telling me I don't have to. And of course that's your intent. But in practice, they feel like my story is how I have to kind of make myself, I don't know what the end of this sentence is, but you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And I think in many ways we could say this is the case for anybody who's in an interview. We all perform, or in this talk right now, we perform in a particular sort of way, a set of what I anticipate my audience will be wanting to hear from me, and who they expect me to be. Of course, it's a much more loaded experience for young unaccompanied asylum seekers who are at risk is not simply their, I don't know, academic profile, but their status, the risk of deportation, the risk of being denied appropriate living conditions, and so on. So I think performance always does come into these encounters. I wouldn't ever suggest that it isn't that. But I think we on COM have really tried to create conditions where young people feel a bit more that they can say, no, I don't want to talk about this, or I'd like to talk about it in this way. So one of the things we do is we start with something which isn't tell me your story. It's what's an object? Look around you. What's an object that means care to you? So it can be something quite apart from somebody's own personal story. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think I just add to that as well, building relationships as part of these kind of forms of engagement with young people is absolutely key. So as with a COM project, you know, working with young people over a period of time, and you really see over time those relationships kind of build and different aspects to narrative emerging, etc. And that's really part of the process, I would say.
Okay, thank you. There's questions coming in thick and fast. Shannon Zhang asks, I don't know if this is for Rachel or for Elaine's project, is the research based more on sociological theory or psychological perspectives?
Okay, well, I can answer that from our point of view. We're an interdisciplinary team. I come at it from a sociologist. We have a political perspective, we have a developmental psychology perspective, and we have very much a legal perspective. So we're very much an interdisciplinary team. My own approach is very much viewing these things through a sociological lens, but I think we're learning a huge amount by having the conversations across disciplines. And that's been a really rich and exciting part of the project.
Rachel?
Similarly, COM is also interdisciplinary, and I'd echo what Elaine has just said. What I would say that we share in common across different disciplines is a critical kind of social justice perspective. Yeah. And so in that ways, that's the link. So we might come at things from a different point of view, but I think we take up the question, so who or what is a child? This isn't something that's sort of naturally made. This is something that's a person's generational position is socially produced. How is that produced? What does it do if somebody is made an adult or made a child? And what ideas does that call up? So we kind of take that sort of approach, but bring different disciplinary perspectives in order to answer those kinds of questions. And I would say I'm a sociologist.
Thank you. I think that also partly answers Eugenia Kartarzi's question about challenges of working across disciplines. Eugenia and Ingi, I'm sorry, I hope that's how I pronounce your name, both have questions about the ethnicity or demographic profile of the young participants in the projects. I think with Elaine's project, that's a bit clearer because that was Albanian young people from ages 16 to 25. So Rachel, do you want to lead on that one? Who can you tell us anything about your participants?
Yeah, so in fact, we specifically left this as an open question. And so we didn't kind of prioritize one particular group or another, in part because we recognize that, say, to have, it's because it's an in-depth qualitative study, we're not going for representation of a particular group of people. So at an epistemological level, we're not looking for generalizability as through representation. But I think more importantly, what the way we've approached this is to understand that each young person that we're speaking with brings a very intersectional and diverse set of experiences, even young people who've come from the same country or the same linguistic background. So one of the things that we try and do is to speak with young people about how do questions, say, around language, around countries of origin, in which people have passed through, intersect with their experience of being children and young people, about the gender. How do those affect their experiences? So we take these as open questions. Having said that, I mean, I can tell you there are young people involved in the research from Kurdish, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, Pakistan, Albania, Azerbaijan, and so forth. So I mean, there's quite a wide group of young people. Eritrea, Ethiopia. I could go on.
Okay. Cecile Remy has a question here. She has done work on staff working in children's homes, and they conceptualize the young people. So Cecile says she has clear evidence that adults do not associate caring and young people. And I was wondering if the young people you work with, or you have any ideas on how to counteract this, such as training for care workers or foster carers.
Rachel, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important question, isn't it? It's one of the things that happens within the legal system and the increasingly hostile environment is this distinction between care and support. And so very often, young people who've come to the UK alone are, say, around 16 or 17, the majority are 16 or 17. And they're assessed by social workers as only needing support, not care. That distinction means that they're placed then in semi-independent or independent accommodation rather than foster care, although this does vary regionally. And in these forms of accommodation, often there's very limited support that's provided and indeed required. These are unregulated forms of care where little of support, where little is required. So I think you're raising a really important issue that has very concrete implications for young people's experiences. What we know from the young people involved in the COM project, I think from things that they've said that I would expect that they would respond to this question is to say everybody needs care, no matter how old you are, and that one of the kind of core challenges is that because they are treated as young people or even as social adults and legal adults, that they are then seen as being kind of on their own, not needing care. So I think they would assert the need for care. I think they practice care with each other. That's one of the ways of kind of counteracting the limits on state care or kind of frontline workers providing care. One of the things that we're doing on COM, and I think you've asked a sort of second question, which is about training. We're right now working on a video project, which should be out very soon, which is to try and get at some of these experiences and issues from the experiences of the young people involved in the research. And we think that these forms of outputs and engagements that are compelling and evocative and emotive might be ways of connecting with foster carers or social workers in ways which help see this care as a kind of human need rather than rooted in a particular social position. Joanna, Elaine, I don't know.
Do you want to add anything, Elaine?
No, I'm just seeing there's another question in the chat about how being a peer researcher, I would agree, sorry, with everything that Rachel said. And I'd also say that there are huge variations in as well. You know, the young people do have experiences of being well cared for as well. But the amount of reciprocity and care that goes on amongst young people is always incredibly striking. But there's a question in the chat about what being a peer researcher, what effect that might have on young people's well-being. And I wondered whether that might be something, Joanna, you might like to respond to. So how might
well-being, I would say it does have challenges for sure. It could be you're anxious or you want to send the message the correct way or the right way, and but also it has its own benefits. I'll say you are more experienced, you know how to approach these young people. And to answer the questions, we did get trained about ethics as well. We did many like Zooms meetings and trainings about how to approach people, how to to come up with the consent forms and then interviewing. So in general, I'll say it's a wonderful project. It's a wonderful thing to do as a peer researcher. But it does have its own challenges as well. Well-being, it gives you you're anxious and nervous about how you're going to be to the young people or how they're going to take it. That's basically the challenge. But as well, the challenge could be even the language sometimes, because you might need to translate if the young person you're interviewing doesn't speak fluent English or understand. So that sometimes is the challenge as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. We're at a time now, so we don't have any time for any more questions, but if you've left a question and it's been unanswered, I will copy and paste this chat and share it with our speakers today. I want to thank the speakers for presenting such fascinating research and sharing with us, and particularly Joanna for coming along, as I know this is not your maybe your first environment of sharing some of this research with people. So thank you very much. You did an excellent job.
Thank you for having me.
I also want to thank the audiences who've come along and joined us for the past 5 weeks. Hopefully we'll get a chance to do something like this again, maybe next term. And I want to say thank you again to my wonderful collaborators, Susanna and Rachel. Hopefully they will agree to work with me again. The chat, guys, is full of thanks and for the speakers and the presentations today, and full of wonderful compliments, so I'll make sure to send those on to you. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for the great questions.